All right, let's do a geometric proof. So given that line LN bisects angle OLM and angle ONM, prove that segment ON is congruent to segment MN. So we're trying to prove that this segment is congruent to that segment. So when we're thinking about this, we do need to think of an overall strategy. Now up here, the fact that LN bisects this angle means that this angle is the same as that angle. And the fact that it bisects that angle means that this angle here is the same as that angle there. So we already have a lot of information here. So you really need to begin to think about strategy. So in the light of the fact that I have two angles that are congruent, really, I only need a little bit of other information to show that these two triangles are congruent. And if the two triangles are congruent, then certainly this segment would be congruent to that segment. So the idea is that if two triangles are congruent, then their corresponding parts, their legs and all of their angles, the corresponding angles, are congruent as well. So this isn't going to be too difficult. There's not a lot that we have to do here. So of course, the first thing we want to do is write down the given information, and that's given. So I wrote that down. That's my first statement. That's my first reason. And I want to eyeball what it is, again, that we're trying to prove. So keep your focus on what it is you're trying to prove and write down what you're given. So the next thing, if they've told me that line L bisects these angles, the very next thing I want to do is I want to show that I understand what that means. What does it mean that a segment bisected an angle? Well, it means what I've drawn up here. So that's what I want to do as my next statement. I did it by drawing it, but now I want to expressly state that here as a statement. So I'm saying that angle OLN, the measure of angle OLN is congruent to the measure of MLN. And that is by definition a bisected angle. So that's what it means for an angle to be bisected, is that those two angles up there are equal. And I could also include underneath that number 2, this angle down here, because it told me that this angle N, was bisected as well. So I could go ahead and state that as well. I could say that ONL, so the measure of angle ONL is congruent to the measure of angle MNL. And that's for the very same reason. So what I've written down here is what I have drawn up here, that those two angles are congruent. And now I'm noticing, and I'm thinking through the different theorems and things, that I have two angles. If I could just show that this is congruent to itself, I would have angle side angle. So that's really the way you should be thinking there. So the third statement here is just simply that segment LN is congruent to itself. And that is the reflexive property of equality. So the reflexive property of equality says that a segment is congruent to itself. And so notice I put that here. So this segment in both of the triangles is the same. And now I have angle side angle. And angle side angle is a theorem that tells you that two angles are congruent. So if you can just show that two angles and an included side are congruent, then you know the two triangles are congruent. So what I'm going to do here is say triangle OLN. So triangle OLN is congruent to triangle. So OLN, it was OLN, so I'm going to do MLN. So triangle MLN. That those are congruent, and that is by the angle side angle theorem. So notice I did OLN, so I'm going to do MLN. That way the corresponding parts match up. So angle O to angle M, angle L to angle L, and angle N to angle N. And that's by angle side angle. So the last statement is my prove statement. So since I have proven that the two triangles are congruent, that means their corresponding parts are congruent. So that means that ON is congruent to MN. So that's what I was trying to prove. So ON, segment ON, is congruent to segment MN. That was the proof statement up here. And that is by corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So that's what I was trying to prove, and this is the reason. So once I have proven that the two triangles are congruent, that means all of their little individual parts, so the corresponding sides are congruent, the other corresponding angles are congruent as well. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And so this was not too bad of a proof. So when you're given a proof, of course, you want to write down the given part. You want to look at what you're trying to prove. You want to look at your diagram. You want to mark things as you go. And with your eyes on the prize, be thinking about what it is you're trying to prove and some of the theorems and postulates that you could use in order to get there. So hit me up with some questions in the comments if you have questions about this proof, or if you have another problem that you would like for me to help you solve on video. I'll see you later.